Immigrant grabbed little girl on subway. Unaware off-duty Marine was watching. The subway car rattled along the underground tracks, its fluorescent lights flickering as it sped through the tunnels beneath the city. It was just another evening, rush hour, crowded, noisy, and filled with the usual mix of exhausted workers, distracted commuters, and the occasional stranger who stood out just a little too much. Among the passengers was a young girl, no older than 6 or 7, clutching a small pink backpack. She sat beside a woman who appeared to be her mother, her tiny hands gripping the edge of her seat as she swung her legs absent-mindedly. A few feet away, a man stood near the subway doors, his posture tense, his eyes darting around the car. He was tall, with unkempt hair and a worn-out jacket, his presence oddly unsettling despite his silence. The girl didn't seem to notice him, nor did most of the passengers, but one person did. At the far end of the car, sitting quietly with his hands resting on his lap, was a man who looked like any other commuter, dressed in jeans and a plain jacket, earbuds in, head slightly tilted down, as if he were lost in thought, but he wasn't. He was watching. Years of training had sharpened his instincts, making it impossible to ignore the sense that something wasn't right. He had spent years in the Marines, trained to assess threats in a split second, to recognize danger before it struck, and something about this man, the way he shifted his weight, the way his eyes locked onto the little girl, set off every alarm in his mind. The subway lurched, the car jerking slightly as it approached the next stop. Passengers swayed with the motion, gripping onto poles and handrails, while the overhead speakers crackled with a garbled announcement. Just then, it happened. The man near the door moved suddenly, his hand reaching out with startling speed. Before anyone could react, he grabbed the little girl's wrist, yanking her from her seat. The child let out a startled yelp, her eyes widening in fear. The woman beside her, her mother, instantly turned, her face twisting in panic. Gasps echoed through the car as passengers froze, shocked by the sudden brazen act. For a split second, time seemed to slow. People processed what they were seeing, but no one moved. The mother's hands shot out, trying to pull her daughter back, her voice rising in frantic protest. The man held firm, his grip tightening. His expression was unreadable, cold, determined. And then, like a shadow breaking free from the crowd, the off-duty Marine was on his feet. His earbuds fell to the floor, forgotten, as he closed the distance in an instant. His voice, low and firm, cut through the stunned silence. Let her go. The subway car had never felt quieter, even with the hum of the tracks beneath them. The man with the girl hesitated, his eyes darting up to meet the Marine's. There was something in that stare, an authority that couldn't be questioned, a strength that left no room for doubt. The tension thickened, passengers still frozen in their seats, waiting to see what would happen next. The girl whimpered, her small hand still trapped in the stranger's grip. The mother pleaded, her voice trembling, "Please let go of my daughter." And yet, the man didn't move. His fingers twitched, his body tensed, as if calculating his next move. Whatever was going through his mind, it was clear that he had no idea who he was dealing with. The Marine, standing just inches away now, squared his shoulders, his muscles taut beneath his jacket. He had faced threats before, had been in situations where hesitation could mean life or death, and right now, he knew there was no room for hesitation. The subway screeched as it neared the next station. The doors would open in seconds. But would it be enough time? The air in the car felt electric, every passenger holding their breath. And then, just as the train began to slow, Everything happened at once. The subway screeched as it slowed into the station, the sound piercing through the tense silence in the car. The stranger's grip on the little girl tightened, his knuckles turning white. His eyes flickered between the Marine and the approaching platform, his mind racing. He had been caught off guard. This wasn't how he had expected things to go. Maybe he thought no one would notice. Maybe he thought no one would care. But he was wrong. The Marine could see the conflict playing out in the man's face. He had seen that look before. The look of someone calculating whether to run, to fight, or to double down on a bad decision. Every muscle in the Marine's body was primed, ready to act in an instant. He had no weapon, no badge, no official authority, but he didn't need any of that. His presence alone was enough to shift the entire balance of power in the subway car. The mother, still clutching her daughter's other arm, was pleading now, her voice thick with desperation. "Please," she begged. "She's just a child." Her eyes were glassy with fear, her body trembling. Around them, passengers whispered, some pulling out their phones, others frozen in place. No one knew what to do. The man took a slow breath, his shoulders rising and falling. His eyes darted to the doors, which were seconds from opening. He had a choice to make. The train jolted to a stop. The doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, and for a moment, time seemed suspended. The Marine took a step closer, his voice calm but firm. "This is your last chance," he said. "Let her go." The man hesitated. Then, in an instant, he shoved the little girl away, sending her stumbling into her mother's arms. The mother gasped, pulling her daughter close, shielding her with her body. Relief flooded her face. But the danger wasn't over. Not yet. The man turned to bolt out the doors. He thought he could disappear into the crowd, slip away before anyone could react. But the Marine was faster. With a swift, controlled movement, he grabbed the man's arm, twisting it behind his back. The stranger let out a sharp grunt of pain, trying to yank himself free, but it was useless. The Marine had him locked down, his grip like iron. The crowd gasped as the two men struggled for a brief second, but it was over before it began. The Marine forced the man onto the subway floor, pinning him down with practiced ease. A passenger, emboldened by the Marine's actions, rushed forward and hit the emergency call button. "We need the police at the next stop," he said urgently into the intercom. The mother was sobbing now, holding her daughter so tightly, it looked like she'd never let go. The little girl buried her face in her mother's chest, shaking. The man on the ground thrashed once more, but the Marine didn't budge. "Stay down," he warned. His voice was calm, steady, like he had done this 1,000 times before. Other passengers began to stir from their shock. Some moved to block the subway doors, preventing the man from making another escape attempt. Others started filming, capturing every detail of what had just happened. The air was thick with tension, but beneath it, something else was growing. A sense of unity, of silent agreement that, for once, the right thing had been done. Minutes stretched on like hours. The train started moving again, pulling into the next station, where uniformed officers were already waiting on the platform. As soon as the doors opened, they rushed inside. The Marine finally released his hold, stepping back as the officers took over. The man didn't fight anymore. He seemed to know it was over. One of the officers turned to the Marine. "You stopped him?" he asked, already piecing together the scene. The Marine nodded. "Yeah." He grabbed the girl. The officer's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening as he looked at the man in cuffs. "We'll take it from here." As they led the suspect away, the subway car remained eerily silent. It was only after the doors shut again that the murmurs started. People, whispering, processing, still trying to make sense of what had happened. The mother turned to the Marine, her face streaked with tears. "Thank you," she choked out. "I don't know what would have happened if you weren't here." The Marine offered a small nod, his expression softening. "She's safe now. That's all that matters." The little girl peeked up at him, her big eyes filled with lingering fear, but also something else. Trust. Gratitude. She didn't say anything, just clung to her mother like she never wanted to let go. The train continued on, but nothing felt normal anymore. People glanced at the Marine with quiet admiration, as if realizing they had just witnessed something extraordinary. He didn't need applause. He didn't need recognition. He had done what he had been trained to do: protect those who couldn't, protect themselves. But what no one knew was that this was just the beginning, because when the case finally reached the courtroom, when the truth of what had almost happened came to light, something happened that no one could have expected. The entire courtroom gasped. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with anticipation. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras poised, waiting to capture every detail. The mother sat in the front row, her hands wrapped protectively around her daughters, as if afraid to let go. The little girl was quiet, her small fingers clutching a stuffed animal, a silent source of comfort in a room filled with so many unfamiliar faces. At the center of it all stood the man who had grabbed her. Dressed in a wrinkled suit, he looked smaller now, less certain than he had been that day on the subway. His hands were cuffed in front of him, his expression unreadable. The charges against him were serious, and everyone in the room knew that what happened next would change his life forever. The Marine sat just a few rows behind the prosecution, his presence calm but commanding. He hadn't sought out attention, but the media had picked up his story anyway. Some called him a hero. Others said he had simply done what anyone with the right training would do. But to the mother and daughter sitting just ahead of him, he was the reason they were safe. That was all that mattered. The judge called for order, and the prosecutor stepped forward. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, "what we have here is not just an isolated incident. This was a moment that could have changed the course of a young girl's life forever. If not for the actions of one man who stepped in before, it was too late." She turned toward the Marine, acknowledging him with a nod. He remained still, his face unreadable. He hadn't wanted praise. He had simply done what needed to be done. Then, as the prosecutor continued, she dropped a piece of information that no one had expected. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as she revealed that the man on trial had a history, one that hadn't been uncovered until now. This wasn't the first time he had tried something like this. There had been other incidents, other children. Some cases had gone unnoticed. Some had been ignored. Gasps filled the room. The mother's grip on her daughter tightened. The weight of what had nearly happened hit everyone at once. The defense tried to argue that the man had made a mistake, that there was no real harm done, that he had acted impulsively. But the evidence was undeniable. Surveillance footage from the subway, witness testimonies, including the Marine's own clear, concise retelling of the event, painted a picture that no one could deny. When the jury was sent to deliberate, the wait felt endless. The mother sat stiffly, holding her daughter close. The Marine remained silent, his eyes steady as he watched the room. Then the jury returned. "All rise," the bailiff announced as the judge took his seat. The verdict was read. Guilty. A collective breath seemed to release across the room. The mother covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. The man at the center of it all showed no reaction. Maybe he had already known this would be the outcome. Maybe he had already accepted his fate. The judge spoke, his tone firm, making it clear that the man would face the full consequences of his actions. There would be no second chances. As the gavel struck, the weight of it all settled in. The mother turned to the Marine, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my daughter." The Marine shook his head, his voice calm. "She's safe. That's what matters." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, eager to get a statement. The Marine didn't stop to talk. He had never wanted the spotlight. He had done his part, and now it was time to move on. As he walked away, the mother and daughter watched him go. The little girl, still holding her stuffed animal, looked up at her mother. "Mommy," she asked quietly, "was he a superhero?" The mother smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Maybe not the kind you see in movies," she said softly. "But he was ours." And with that, life moved forward. The subway kept running. Strangers passed one another on crowded platforms, some aware of the story, some never knowing how close danger had come to one little girl. But somewhere, in the quiet corners of the city, there were still people like the Marine, watching, ready, willing to stand up when it mattered most. And sometimes that was enough.